The story opens with the echo of boots slamming against the marble floor, a sharp rhythm that slices through the silence of the grand military hall. Sunlight filters through tall windows, touching the edge of a shattered medal lying on the ground, its ribbon torn, its shine dulled by dust and humiliation. Standing there, trembling but unbroken, is General Arya Holt. Her uniform, once immaculate and adorned with stars of honor, is smeared with mud and blood. Around her, the men who once saluted her now stand smirking, their laughter a low, venomous hum that fills the air with cruelty. The sting of betrayal burns behind her eyes. These were her soldiers, her brothers in arms, and yet, in one single orchestrated moment, they'd turned against her, stripping her of rank, dignity, and respect. She had devoted 30 years of her life to her country, only to be humiliated in front of the very people she had sworn to protect. Outside, the sun blazed over Fort Raventon, its white walls gleaming with the indifferent light of a world that no longer seemed to care who Arya was. She could still hear the echo of the tribunal's final words, words that branded her as a failure, accused of negligence in a mission that had cost innocent lives. But the truth was darker than that. She'd been framed by those who couldn't stand the idea of a woman commanding their ranks. Now, stripped of her title and walking out of the base with nothing but a duffel bag and a wound that went deeper than the scars on her skin, Arya's breath trembled in the wind. Her medals were gone. Her uniform would never be worn again. Yet inside, buried under the pain, something began to burn, a quiet, steady flame that refused to die. If you're watching this on Kindness Corner, and you believe in hope, compassion, and second chances even when the world turns its back on you, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Because sometimes, the people written off by society are the ones who rise the highest. Arya's days that followed were painted in gray. She moved to a small coastal town, the kind where the sea always looked tired and the wind carried whispers of forgotten dreams. She rented a small room above a fisherman's workshop, spending mornings mending nets just to earn a few coins. Each night, she sat by the window overlooking the docks, her hands tracing the scars along her wrist, reminders of a life that had been both glorious and cruel. The only photograph she kept was one of her daughter, Leah, taken years before the world had fallen apart. Leah had run away after an argument, claiming she couldn't bear growing up under a mother who was more soldier than parent. Arya had tried to write letters, dozens of them, but never received a single reply. In the silence of her loneliness, she whispered her daughter's name like a prayer. But fate, as it often does, was quietly preparing to test her again. One foggy morning, Arya woke to shouting near the docks. A group of local men, thick jackets, heavy boots, and arrogance in their tone, had cornered a teenage boy near the old boatyard. They accused him of stealing, though the boy swore he hadn't. Arya recognized the tone of mob cruelty. It was the same she had once faced in uniform. Her instinct flared before she even thought. She walked toward them, her voice low, commanding, yet laced with calm. They laughed. One of them stepped closer, his smirk wide as he looked her up and down. "Old lady, go home," he said. "This isn't your fight." But she stood still, unshaken, her eyes cold as steel. When he shoved her shoulder, something inside her snapped. The years of silence, the humiliation, the betrayal, it all surged back. In a blur, she disarmed the men, twisted his wrist, and sent him crashing into the sand. The others hesitated, stunned by the precision of her movement, the absolute authority in her stance. She didn't want to fight, but when they charged, she moved like a storm. Her body remembered every drill, every combat reflex. The boy ran to safety as Arya faced them all, 1 against 5, and when the dust settled, they lay groaning on the ground, defeated not by her fists alone but by the sheer unbreakable presence she carried. She turned away, her breath steady, and the whispers began to spread across the small town. That woman, she fought like a general. Days passed, and news traveled faster than the tide. A journalist arrived, curious about the mysterious woman who had stood against local criminals alone. When Arya's past came to light, the world that had abandoned her suddenly remembered her name. Messages began to flood in, soldiers who had served under her, citizens who had admired her bravery, and even a letter from Leah. Her daughter had seen the story online and, after years of silence, wrote just 6 trembling words, "Mom, I'm proud of you again." Arya read that line over and over, her heart unraveling. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. The military board reopened her case. Evidence emerged that the mission failure she was blamed for had been sabotaged from within. The men responsible, the same ones who had stood laughing at her humiliation, were exposed. Arya was called back to testify, not as a disgraced officer, but as a woman reclaiming her honor. The courtroom was silent as she walked in, her once-torn uniform now restored, her medals returned to her chest. The men avoided her gaze, their arrogance now replaced with shame. She spoke with grace, not vengeance, her voice steady as the sea she had come to love. By the time she finished, there wasn't a soul in the room who didn't feel the weight of what they had done. Weeks later, as the sun set over the base she once called home, General Arya Holt stood again before her troops. The same walls that once echoed with betrayal now thundered with applause. She looked out over the faces of men and women who saluted not just a soldier, but a survivor. The flag behind her fluttered in the golden light, and her voice broke slightly as she said the only words that truly mattered: honor isn't given by rank. It's proven by how we rise when we're broken. If this story of strength and redemption touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your support helps stories of courage like this reach hearts that need hope. And before we end, tell us in the comments, what does rising again mean to you? Because as Arya looked out over that crowd, tears softening the fierce steel in her eyes, she realized that she had crushed not just the lies and the enemies who tried to bury her, but also the doubt that had haunted her soul for years. She wasn't just a general anymore. She was proof that even in a world that breaks you, dignity can still bloom again from the ashes. And as the final rays of sun kissed the medals on her chest, she whispered to herself, not in triumph, but in quiet peace, they didn't know who they were messing with, but now they do.